Okay, let me start first with a disclaimer. Okay, I cannot claim to be a counselor or a psychotherapist or even an expert in religion. My only claim to being Jungian is the fact that I was a former patient of this woman here. So, you're going to notice that I specify their reflections. These are Jungian perspectives from somebody who was once a patient. So, reflections of a mental patient. Okay, let's proceed now with the next photograph, please. This particular photo is one of the most poignant ones that were taken after Yolanda. It made it to the top 10 most important photos of Time magazine for 2013. This particular photograph actually was taken at that time probably around 3 days after Yolanda hit Tacloban and the neighborhood. And one thing they've noticed is that some people, particularly the relief goods people who are in the social stuff there, were asking, why are you making a procession at a time that you should be looking for food? And I think the Babaylan is still alive. Okay, let the other people take care of the food and the relief goods, because we also have to take care of the spirit that is broken at that time. And so, technically speaking, you're going to see that the Babaylan concept is still very much alive. Unconscious, but when triggered by emergencies, it arrives. Kaya napapansin nyo, pag may sunog, imbis na iligtas yung pera, yung kahadero, yung mga santong unang inaliligtas. Okay? There's this natural tendency in the archetype of the Filipino. Now, regarding the concept of the Black Nazarene, you're going to notice they're carrying images which are representative of the one of the two most important archetypes in the Filipino psyche, whether it is positive or negative. One is the suffering hero. You're going to notice in Philippine history, all our heroes are mga inapi, they're the martyred heroes. And then we have the child, both the childlike, which is the positive emanation, and the childish. You look at our government, you know what I mean. Okay. Now, when you try to look closely at this setup, let me start with an anecdote. I had a professor, I wouldn't tell the name in the school, who was very, very critical of the Quiapo phenomenon. And yes, it arouses extreme reactions. Either you like it or you hate it. Some people call it faith, some people call it hysteria, some people call it mysticism, some people call it superstition. And so there was one time this professor told me, first time I came in the 1950s here in Manila, it's ironic, coming from a very well-disciplined province, all of a sudden I would see all these Manileños jumping all over the place in a procession. And so I said, what a bunch of barbarians, okay? To confess, I once thought that people who are devotees of the Black Nazarene are like that, a bunch of, barbarians, until I become one of them, okay? And so now I'm talking to you, okay? So technically speaking, what is it all about? So we'll be reading the concept of the Black Nazarene from the point of view of somebody who came from Jung. But first, I'll give you a backgrounder. So let's go with the cult of the Black Christ in the Philippines. Now, the cult of the Black Christ started, this is a Hispano-American thing. In Europe, the medieval ages, up until in Latin America in the 1600s, there is a preoccupation with Christian images that are black. There are several explanations as to why we are drawn to black Madonnas and black images, etc. And these are not black in a sense that they are of African features. These are basically European or Caucasian images that are purposely colored stark black. It will be a very, very long discussion as to why it is very, very common. But to cut the story short, they brought the cult of the black divine image in the Philippines. And we are not necessarily foreign to that. You look at our likha and our bulul, the darker, the more mysterious they are. And so when it came here, let's go to the next slide. The Philippines actually had several in the 1600s, 1700s. In particular, you have here the Señor de la Paciencia, which is entirely dark in Intramuros, now totally destroyed after 1945. And the Santo Cristo de Lomos, which was found by the deaf-mute Chinese laborer in Benilde, sometime 1729, the original was also destroyed. So there are so many cults of the Black Christ, the Cristo Negro, in Manila, but during the Spanish era, but most of them disappeared in time. But one is very, very resilient, and that is the cult of the Black Nazarene. Okay. Unknown to most people, in fact, I only learned about this year, okay? There are, in fact, two images, okay? Now, first, I want to clarify the terminology. In Hispanic sculpture and iconography, when you say Nuestro Padre Jesus Nazareno, Jesus Nazareno refers exclusively to an image of Christ carrying the cross. If it is crucified, you call it a Santo Cristo. So there is a distinction between that, okay? Now, the Nazareno is very common in Spain because of the Holy Week celebrations. And so inevitably, they have to bring it later on to Latin America and consequently in the Philippines. Now, you have here some specimens coming from Spain. Next slide, please. And then you're going to notice there's a tendency for it to be hunched. But the standard is there, wearing a long tunic and then cross. And then let's go with this one. Now, the Black Nazarene icons of the Philippines are not Filipino. They actually came from Mexico. What you see now in the picture is in fact the original one, which, if we're going to believe the chronicles or the dates, is around 1606. So this is the original Black Nazarene. It arrived from Mexico in 1606 and was enshrined in Bagong Bayan, then in Intramuros with the Recollects. And you're going to see that it is black. It's very, very common in Mexico at the time. There is this preference for the Black Christ carrying the cross. Now, this is also very, very grandiose. And according to oral traditions, it's actually wearing real gold, silver, and diamond stuff. Now, this particular sculpture, which was presented there at the San Nicolas Church, or the Recollectos Church, actually became the focal point of an exclusively Spanish cult. So this is primarily for male Spanish residents of Intramuros. Eventually, the Brotherhood grew and began to accept non-Filipinos, and it became very popular. Now, because of this popularity, and you know the tactile concept of the Filipino, okay? Filipinos are very tactile with their devotion. If they can touch something, they will touch it. Kaya ilabas na lahat ng panyo, okay? Pwede lang yapusin, etc. Okay? Yung iba nga nangahablot pa na kung ano-ano to make talismans out of them. That is our piety, which we carried over from our pre-colonial past. Now, what happened is, according to the stories, oral tradition, apparently the Spaniards are not pleased with the Filipinos literally touching all those stuff, with all those gold stuff there, okay? So they decided that, we have to take care of this particular stuff. So they decided to order another one, a smaller one, less ornate, which they will put there at the entrance so that the Indios and the inferior people will just stay there. The Spaniards will be here. Please remember, churches in the past don't have pews. The chairs are for the Spaniards, the rest would sit on the floor. People who are not necessarily in the higher ranks of the hierarchy have to stay outside, okay? But it's true with the Chinese in particular. So what happened here is that there are two Black Nazarenes, one in the altar, the other one there at the entrance. And the one at the entrance is becoming the most popular one, the more popular one. So it came to the point that that particular thing, since one is less ornate, one is called Nazareno Mayaman, the other one is the Pobre. You get that one? Okay. Now, so the Pobre became so popular. So it was decided by the Bishop of Manila, let's transfer this by the 1700s to Quiapo. Now, they don't transfer it to Quiapo because Quiapo is a poor town. It's not. It's like transferring, at the time, it's one of the richer towns of Manila. So it's like transferring an image from Forbes Park to Ayala, Alabang. They just needed a bigger place where all the crowds can be accommodated. And that church is in Quiapo. So on the 1700s, they decided, okay, take that thing, okay, put it there in Quiapo where the rest of the Philippines can actually venerate it without people being concerned with racial divisions. So they put it there in Quiapo. And once in Quiapo, it took a life of its own. This is an aquarelle painting from the 1840s of the procession in Quiapo. Still very orderly, for Quiapo at that time was still the middle class district that it is. And you're going to notice the Black Nazarene there being carried in procession to the eastern gate of the church. So famous was this procession and festivity of January 9 that it was actually featured in Jose Rizal's El Filibusterismo. The Black Nazarene does not have a feast day. You don't celebrate something that is suffering. But since the people in Quiapo wanted a festivity, they got a technicality. Since lumipat siya ng January 9, gawin natin fiesta anniversary. So they get it. Okay? Of course, what's the point of fiesta without eating and all this? Okay, next. So, by the 1900s, Quiapo has become literally a complex. Pag Friday, traffic. Friday is Quiapo Day. Everything is at standstill. So you're going to see here the interior of the old church and the procession. By the 1920s, it began to show the raucous, yung magulong aspect. Primarily because Quiapo was transforming itself into a working class neighborhood, and the working class people carried their own brand of piety, more spontaneous, more passionate compared to the elite. And so apparently it began to take its normal course here. The former friar-led devotion is now being owned by the Filipino as theirs and theirs alone. So interestingly, a Mexican icon has become a Filipino one. Now, and try to look closely, what is it that people can do this kind of feats for devotion? I mean, people are saying this is crazy, this is hysteria. But then again, if you believe in something, you have faith in something, it drives you to do things which you're not even aware that you're doing. Such as, ba't ako nakalamin ng ganyan? Okay? And all those stuff. So I'm going to start now with what we call a Jungian interpretation of the Black Nazarene of Quiapo. Before we go proceed with that, let me present to you the traditional interpretation of the church. The traditional church interpretation goes like this. What you see here is actually a print from the 1920s when the Nazareno was not yet mutilated because pinagputol-putol yan to satisfy the devotees. At that time, in its grandiose form, it looks like this. So the black color, allegedly nasunog siya nung dumating sa Maynila. Wala pong katotohanan yun, hindi pag-aralan nyo. Talagang black lang talaga ang wood. Okay? Ikalawa, the tres potentias. Ito yung parang race, okay, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. You only use this with Christ, not with other things. You have the cross, which is obviously the symbol of redemption. Red and maroon, which is the color of martyrdom. The crown of thorns. His kingdom is not of this world, but that of the suffering servant. The rope, which is a passive acceptance of the passion. You call the little balls there granadas, pomegranates, okay? Because it's associated with the passion. And then you have the bare feet. Now, take note, until the 1950s, naka-sandals po yan. Okay, ewan kung nasaan na po yung sandals. Hindi ko po tinatago, okay? Okay, pero naka-sandals po siya dati, okay? But now, it's barefoot. So, many people are implying, okay, barefoot siya, so I presume it's humility. Now, I want to make it clear, we are not debunking that interpretation. That interpretation will still be valid as other interpretations. But sila pumupunta sa Quiapo? Is it economic? Is it more of the personal aspect? Or is it Jungian? You know, it is useless to find one common interpretation for something so numinous that is beyond, sabi nga ni Jung, not even beyond explanation, but beyond explication. I really don't know what the word means, but that's it. Okay. Now, 2 years ago, together with Dr. Villasor and her students at the Asian Social Institute, we had this colloquium of sorts in trying to understand the iconography of the image. I bought an image with me at the time. And we tried to analyze it, and we discovered something. There are so many archetypal symbols which are present in the image alone. If Carl Jung is present and he visited the Philippines, probably he would declare that the Black Nazarene of Quiapo is an Jungian symbol, an archetype symbol par excellence. And that's the reason why people are reacting to it in such a strong manner without knowing why they are acting that way. For example, Meron ako nakasakilalang babae na pumunta sa Quiapo. She is from San Juan. Naglalakad siya sa San Juan, and then noong fiesta, nakarating siya ng Quiapo without knowing it. And then sabi niya, naglalakad lang ako, pero tinangay ako dito. Nang nagising ako, naglalakad siya ng gising, okay? Nasa Quiapo na ako. My mom also, it happened to my mom, it happened to several people. You never plan to be there, and yet you're there. Tinatangay ka, unconsciously. Another example would be this. Okay, may mga kaso tayo na aakyat, takot sa heights. Yung babae, dahil may posisyon, ang taas-taas ng karosa ng Nazareno. And then umakyat siyang bigla, ang galing, ang bilis, nakita namin eh. Nung bababa na siya, hindi na siya makababa. Dahil sumisigaw siya, paano ko nakakyat dito? Sabi nila, ewan ko, tumalon ka na lang. Ayaw niya tumalon, so the lady behind her pushed her. And of course, without may palspakan kami. Eh, tama lang. But then again, she couldn't understand, paano ko nakaakyat doon? Takot ako sa heights. But then, you see, the unconscious is so powerful, you might not consciously yearn for it, but the unconscious is hooked to that archetype because it's universal. Everybody is hooked to that. And therefore, mararamdaman nyo, there are some people who are not even religious, dinaanan na Nazareno, umiiyak, di niya alam kung bakit. The unconscious is touched by an archetype. Now, we will try to look at some of these archetypes, not comprehensive, kulang ng oras, and let's try to see how it works. Okay? Let's go first with Christ. Sabi niyo, pag nananaginip daw kayo ng religious figure, bawa si Christ, si Buddha, etc., it represents the self in its fullness. So it's a positive thing. So, naturally speaking, Christ is not just a symbol of somebody who saved us. If you're a Christian or a good man or a good cultural hero if you are a non-believer, I think Christ is the symbol of an individuated person, a person who is emotionally, psychologically mature. And our unconscious knows that. So, the very first thing to remember, when Christ enters dreams or your imagination, we're naturally drawn to it because he's the symbol of fullness. But what if it is a black Christ? Now, the color black is often associated with death with us. And it is true. The black represents the unconscious and the sacred mysteries. The darker it is, the more unconscious or the more mysterious it is. Kaya napapansin niyo po, ilan pong santo sa Pilipinas ang maitim at pinupuntahan. Ang Birhen ng Antipolo ay maitim. Okay. Ang Poong Nazareno ay maitim. Ang Santo Niño ng Pandacan ay maitim. Ang Santo Niño ng Cebu ay hindi maitim. Pinaitim yan dati. Tapos binalik sa dati. Ngayon gusto pa rin, some people wanted it black. Again, the idea, what is it in black? The archetypal unconscious of mystery is there. Black evokes mystery. Mas maitim, mas misteryoso, therefore mas sacred, therefore mas milagroso. We somehow know that, although we cannot express it. Third, blackness represents the darkness of the soul. Especially now, eto, naghihirap na Kristo, tas depressed ka pa. You long for something na, yung concept ng pakikiramay, very strong sa Pilipino. And so, you're going to notice this kind of image appears in the context of suffering in the unconscious concept, depression. But it's interesting, Black Nazarene may also be a shadow. And let me tell you this weird dream, not mine, okay? This is the weird dream of a friend of mine. It's an artist, okay, and an architect. And dream niya, nung bata siya, around 10 years old, nananaginip siya, hinahabol daw siya ng Nazareno sa bahay nila. Okay? Kasama yung krus. So, first floor, second floor, nagkakabulan sila. Ayaw siyang tantanan. Okay? So, ang ginawa niya, nagtago siya sa kama. Pagtago niya sa kama, nandun ng Black Nazarene sa kanya. So, takot siya. You get the point? And you're going to notice here, lumalampas na tayo sa religious, sa psychological. Since the Nazarene is black, dark, and sometimes frightening for some children, it appears in your dream as your shadow. Okay? So in that dream, hinahabol siya ng Nazareno. That's unlived life. I only realized it now when I was making this talk. So you see, our unconscious takes symbols from our culture. And that symbol becomes their language in telling you this is what you need to do in your life. Okay? Sometimes you can take it literally, sometimes you can take it metaphorically, particularly if you are in Jungian work. Next. Vivid red or maroon. I have an artist friend, his name is Alex T. Ayun, doon siya. They advise yan sa akin para daw makabenta ng painting. Okay, tatlo, make it sure it's about sex. Okay? And number 2, make it big. Number 3, color it red. Okay. Pag red, litaw na litaw agad. There is life in red. It's not a boring color. Now, there's an interesting thing. There's a universal attraction to red, for it represents the blood, the life force. All of us wanted to live life with passion. Ayaw naman natin maging boring, walang kabuhay-buhay, parang anemic. We wanted our life to be full. Therefore, our blood is running. And it's interesting to note that this particular suffering guy is wearing a very celebratory clothing. I doubt if Christ is wearing something like that when he was with us. But then again, iconography is never about realism. It's about capturing through symbols your emotions and drawing you to that meaning. You're going to see here also that, we'll try to look at the halo here, okay? The circle, which is the symbol of the Jungian concept of the self, is very prominent. In Vince, lumalabas yan sa Nazarene. Glow, yung halo, is the self. Ngayon, so the self is even covered by the self, so how more full can become. Now, try to take note, 4, quaternity is very important in Jungian therapy. 4, whether you dream of it or you're attracted to it, is a symbol of fullness. Try to look at the Nazarene. 1, 2, 3. But if you study Byzantine literature, there is actually a hidden halo at the back. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's full. And this is a universal sign, symbol, that appears all over the world. The cross is such a sign. The cross is also a symbol of quaternity. Sabi nga nila, if you're male or female, yung 4 archetypes of fullness: warrior, king, magician, lover. And then the Latin cross, you're going to see one is longer, representing the dominant one. Okay? Another thing, it's the world tree. Now, napapansin nyo sa mythology, there are several important events in mythology that happens near trees or on trees. Christ is crucified on a tree. The Buddha was enlightened in a tree. In the past, some of the spirits in pre-colonial Philippines appear on trees. And just recently, very archetypal, the Virgin Mary appears in apparitions atop trees. The tree is somewhat the symbol of salvation or the heroic act, but also the symbol of the burden of individuation. You're carrying the cross, and I'll be frank with you, inner work or therapy is not easy. You have to confront your own cross. You might not even like it, but that cross will help you heal. Ironically, still remember the story of Christ, the cross is an ugly thing, but that ugly thing, your shadows, your complexes, will also be the instrument of your healing and your resurrection. Okay, and then let's go back to that slide. Many people don't know this, that red is often also considered the most masculine of colors. Okay, now, and it's interesting to note that the devotion to the Black Nazarene is a predominantly male one. One of the few, the other one being the Lady of Peña Francia, wherein males are attracted to. Why? There's a life force here. So the image is male, and yet it accommodates the female. Very male, and yet, let's go with the next slide. You're going to see here, there are flowers over the case. You can't imagine a man wearing a gown with golden flowers embroidered all over the place. Again, it's not literal. Red and golden things. Fertile life. The productive life is represented by the vine. Flowers are a favorite motif in all cultures. It's also a mandala and a symbol of the self emerging. And more important than that, this very masculine figure accommodated the feminine. Okay? The feminine being the flower. And many people have noticed a parallelism between a masculine and yet feminine person, and that is the Dionysian principle, Christ being called by Jung as a Dionysian personality. Okay? Now, this is something more anecdotal on my part. Okay? Jungian alchemy and the Black Nazarene. It never occurred to me, in fact, I don't understand this thing, the alchemy thing, until around 3 years ago, when I was first seeking help from my doctor, I don't even understand what she's saying. Ano ba yung nigredo niyan, okay? Hindi ko nga kilala si Odysseus at si Hephaestus, ni-research ko pa. Hirap naman. Papagaling na nga ako, pinagre-research pa ako. You get the point? So, it's hard because you're dealing with people with mythological language. Hindi naman ako mahilig sa literature ng araw. But it's now that I appreciate this format. Now, this is how I summarize it in layman's terms. According to Jung, everybody undergoing through a process of renewal and inner work had to pass through 4 stages. I will not use the technical terms, I will just use the color. Black face, white face, red, then gold. Black, white, red, gold. Repeat. Black, white, red, gold. If you try to look at the healing process, these colors are prominent, at least based on my experience and some people who underwent Jungian therapy. Let's go with the first phase, the nigredo phase. I do not understand why in my first major, I only had one, okay, and I was not able to go to work at the time. And yet, despite that, I kept on going to shrines. I am not religious, I don't go to church, but I go to the shrine, okay? I don't care about nagagatin na sister dito. Okay. Nagbabago na po ako. Now, the idea here is that I don't really care about the math of the time, but I go straight to the shrine where there is an image of the Black Christ. I explain this to you. I don't know why I'm drawn to black images, and they are appearing in my dreams. At that time, also, I'm undergoing depression, so my dreams have color, and not color, it's not even a color, it's dark. I'm an artist, and all my artworks are dark at that time. In fact, my very first painting is a black sun. How can you be more depressed than that? Okay, now, since I gave it to her, so, now, is it still with you? Okay, thank you. Okay, now, the black nigredo face is actually the initial melancholia, or sometimes the good things are preceded by this kind of storm. You've got depressed. Sometimes depression is clinical, like in my case, but it's also a sign that you have to deal with something inner. You have to sort something in you. And so that depression is actually now being projected in images that are black. So all of a sudden, I find solace in black images. Apparently, I am also encountering my shadow. My depression, my melancholia, all being reflected in the devotion to a black deity. And then the depression lifted up. Sabi ko nga, napaka-liturgical. My sisters, okay. Liturgical yung aking depression. I still remember that. I had a breakdown on Ash Wednesday. I was telling that. And the depression lifted immediately after Easter. Okay. I don't know if this is archetypal or synchron, but I found it helpful. Now, what's interesting, it followed another stage, Albedo, or the white stage. After the cleansing of all those ugly material, you enter into a white period, aha period. Di ba minsan, after your depression, you end up being wiser, and then, aha, ting, okay, may realization ka na, ngayon pa naman yun. And so you enter into a period of reflection. All of a sudden, you are now knowledgeable of yourself. Kaya pala ako ganito. Kaya pala ako ganito. Kaya pala ganito yung mga complexes ko. Ganito pala ang mga works ko. Kaya pala ako napapraning ko minsan, blah, blah, blah. You understand it. So this is the new day. Dati confused ka. Ngayon, clear na clear. So white. And it appears all over the Black Nazarene concept. Black. Tapos ang susunod na layer ng kanyang damit is white. And then after the white period, hindi naman pwedeng understanding lang. Yeah, I understand. You have to live it. And you have to take responsibility for it. So you dive into life. And you now enter into the rubedo, which is the redness of life. And it's interesting to note that in my artwork, after the nigredo, the black face, lahat ng drawings ko, simple, parang zen, maliit lang yung black, puro white naman yung paper. Ay, ano to? Nasa Albedo phase. And then I entered the red phase. Still remember 2008, 9, puro red, tas puro about sex yung ano, yung okay, diba? So it's the redness of life. It's about the libido. Get the point? So suddenly you discovered, wow, I am embodied spirit. So you are alive, but this time in a more full form. So there's a surge of vitality, enthusiasm, and the shadows integrate, and then your inner conflicts are resolved. And in this state, you feel so alive that you become productive. All of a sudden, you're doing things that you would never think you're doing. I entered a martial art, being lampa when I was young. All of a sudden, I like it pala, and all those stuff. So you're going to see this pattern. You discover not only your real self, you are now living it, so the blood is flowing, you're red with rubedo, you're red with life. And then you are now producing something, and that is your gold. And after producing the gold, you cannot claim that you can stay in gold forever because you will be fooling yourself. You go back to a new cycle, a new crisis, black again, then white, red, and then you have to produce your gold, etc. Now, it's a roller coaster ride, para kung paikot-ikot yan, and I think that for most of us, it will remain that way. Now, let's try to see final reflections about the Black Nazarene of Quiapo. From a Jungian perspective, this is a very interesting photo. This is by Raymond Gapi, a photographer. He took a photo of Andres Bonifacio's monument. And then you have that. Okay, very good. Now, the icon of the Black Nazarene is so alchemical. In fact, pag nasa taas kayo ng City Hall or nasa helicopter kayo, para siyang alchemical process yung precision, para siyang soup. Kasi ang uniform nila, black, white, red, and yellow gold. So you are actually reenacting unconsciously the whole process. And in the alchemical process, the circling stuff is very important, circumambulation. And when you look at the procession, kaya ang tagal-tagal niyan is you have the Black Nazarene at the center, but it's not moving forward. It's moving like this. Right? So, and remember, it's again an unconscious sign that you want to be whole. Circle is fullness. That's why in all religions, going around a temple, a shrine, whether it be Zen, Tibetan, Christianity, or whatsoever, particularly in Islam, they make a circle at the Kaaba. Okay, it's a sign that it's also a yearning to be whole with the self. Very, very archetypal. And ultimately, the Black Nazarene of Quiapo is an archetypal symbol of wholeness and the self, the sacred within. So we are humans, and I've heard this very, very clear from our two doctors here, Dr. Yenko and Dr. Villasor. We are always drawn to symbols that always promises us of wholeness, whether we like it or not. So try to look at your so-called attractions to particular objects. What is it in that object that makes you attracted to it? Probably it promises something, a promise of wholeness perhaps, which you see in this icon. So you're going to see when Yolanda passed through Tacloban, and this is in the Visayas, they carried with them the Black Nazarene, not only because in the conscious level they're praying for healing and stuff, because they're holding to it, because they have to hold on to themselves. In this time of crisis and depression, they have to be very whole in order to survive this something, not just the wound of nature, but the wound of the self. Now, let me just show you one thing. Okay, that's one of our friends na yung taga-ilat ng company. Ito tayo sa isa. Okay, let's go with the cover. Because there's a story behind that. I participated in I've been participating since 2011. This is quite unique for this year because hindi natapos ang Mass this year. Okay, Cardinal Tagle reach only up to the Our Father because archetypal, the Mass, when the Mass ends, the procession begins and there's no space in between. So if it is pag naging excited masyado, in the middle of the Our Father, tumakbo na yung mga nasa Manila Hotel. So hindi natapos ang Mass. If they're going to stop it, there might be a stampede. And then hinihila na ng mga tao yung imahen. So the bishops decided, okay, let's continue. And it's useless na pagalitan mo sila lalo. I mean, that's the point. Okay, let's not blame one another here. And so hinilang bigla yung santo. Muntik na siya nahulog because it's not really well protected. So hinila yan. 600 policemen are useless with if you have 2 million people pulling it. Okay, so what happened is that bumagsak siya. Bumagsak nasira yung cross niya. Okay? Now, what's interesting, people are literally in the most extreme manner, they wanted wholeness. So unconsciously, they're grabbing it and literally pulling out portions of it. Napapansin niyo yan sa mga posisyon, pag may mga bulaklak po tayo sa karosa, at the end, takbuhan ng mga tao, sige, hablot na dyan. Okay? Huwag niyo sabihin mahalang flowers, and then ganyan na talaga kinalakhan natin. But this time around, it's the Black Nazarene image, which is in danger. So we have this man, and we have identified his name. His name is Adam Rich Sunday. And he jumped from the stage and embraced the Black Nazarene, which is a very dangerous thing to do. Because pwede kang bumagsak sa sa barrier na yung mga tusok. Baka mamatay ka dyan. And so he was asked, why are you going to risk your life for a piece of wood? And I was reflecting on it last night. Why not? First, it's my duty to serve an antique image which has been part of my country's history. Second, it is my duty to serve an image that is an icon of my people. But in an archetypal way, I am also saving myself. If the Nazarene would disappear from our culture, if it is damaged, it's just like imagining Mexico without the Virgin of Guadalupe, or imagining Poland without the Jasna Gora, the Black Madonna. These are no longer just national symbols. It's already a part of our psyche. That's why, Catholic or not, the Nazareno rings a bell to them. Even if you are so angry with it, okay, ba't ka nagagalit? At bakit lagi mong iniisip yun? Because it's something very Filipino. So when it disappears from the Philippines, from our minds and our communities, part of us disappears too. And why do we feel sad if it disappears? It's just a piece of wood. We could replace it with another. It's because archetypically, parts of its symbols are actually reflections of ourselves. If it dies, if it disappears, we are broken too. So that's how important it is. So we should not look at symbols as if they're just mere symbols. Symbols are important. We are reacting to it because in the eyes of the Nazarene, we also see the reflection of who we are. Okay? Now, don't ask questions because I'm hungry now. Okay? And I would like to thank you for being a nice audience to me.